Welcome to this section on language and articulation. I must tell you, in UPSC, you don't really need fancy vocabulary, poetic words, strong language, and skills of literature. What you really need is to write logically and clearly, and you should be able to communicate with precision. So let's understand what that means and what kind of skills we need to work on to develop that. Here are three words I would like to use: clarity, control, and purpose. Clarity is all about being logical and simple, right? Versus complexity, in terms of using flowery language and making difficult, complex sentences with commas. We'll talk about that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is having control. What does control mean? Control means that you have an academic, you have a balanced, and you have a respectful tone. Don't use, preachy, casual, or sarcastic language, right? So having a balance of language. Then the third thing is purposeful. How do we make sure our writing is purposeful? Is when it has a sequence, it has a flow, right? So our ideas flow from one thing to the other, and that is extremely important. So let's learn how to build these three things: clarity, control, and purpose through language. And remember, content is what you say, and articulation is how you say it. This is your subject matter, and articulation is everything else. It is the flow, tone, structure, and the way your idea is communicated. So, overall communication of your content. So, in this lesson, we are going to understand the tools necessary from an articulation perspective. While there are many language tools out there, and this can take even a few years to learn. In fact, in English graduation subjects and other language graduation subjects, students take an awfully long amount of time to actually learn the secrets of nuances of language. But for the purpose of UPSC essay writing, let's stick to the three most critical ones that you'll use over and over again. The first thing is understanding how to structure your sentences and paragraphs. I find a lot of students making the mistake of write extremely complicated sentences, repeating sentences, and sometimes paragraphs. They are not broken down in the right way, and they don't convey anything special, rather than just being some loose sentences brought together in a paragraph. The paragraph has more to do than just be a container of sentences. So we'll see that. And the second thing is, we said there are three different narrative styles, right? So there is the descriptive style, there is the argumentative style, and there is the persuasive style. So we will see how to adjust your flow or your language to these three narrative styles. And then finally, we will look at what is often called rhetorical devices or language tools, how to construct sentences in different ways to make them more interesting. I have some examples. Rhetorical devices is a subject in itself, but we'll consider some 4 or 5 rhetorical devices that are used more than others, and we'll see what kind of importance they have and what kind of impact they bring. These are the tools that make your essay more readable and engaging. You would have seen that if you write blogs, that there are checks nowadays available for this purpose. That is your article more readable. And one thing I do, which has personally helped me a lot, is write blogs and then use these tools to check if my language is readable or not. And more often than not, it gives me great feedback saying, oh, your sentence structure was pretty complicated, or you did not break things down into more readable paragraphs, or your narrative style was such and such, or you could use more rhetorical devices to bring more interestingness to your writing. So your writing should be a treat to read, and these are the tools that make it so. Let's talk about sentence structure to begin with. It's a good idea to have all kinds of sentences, but I always prefer to have more short and medium. Long sentences create more opportunity for mistakes, so I tend to avoid it. Remember, it's a good idea to have one sentence communicate one idea. Sometimes we try to pack in a lot of things in one sentence, and with commas and commas and commas and ands and ands and ands, and that makes it extremely complex or comma heavy construction. So this is something to avoid. Here's an example. Technology, which is ever changing and vast, comma, affects every part of human life, comma, be it health, comma, communication or economy. Instead, you could communicate it using two sentences like this. Technology is evolving rapidly. It touches every sphere of human life from health to communication. Believe me, there is nothing to be achieved by writing in what might seem a little more flowery than this second piece, right? So this is very difficult to read, and sometimes it is gives the impression that the writer is just trying very hard to sound more intelligent than what he or she is. So this gives rise to some sort of idea that you have some pretense in your language, but this is very clear and simple. And clear and simple gives you the picture that you are earnest, that exposes your earnest side, your sincere side of your communication. Now let's take a look at paragraphs. Paragraphs are a very diverse, versatile construct, and there are many ways in which paragraphs can be written, and there is no single rule for how a paragraph must be written. But I'll give you some guidance. I follow an approach for essay writing, especially UPSC. I like to follow the Peel model, and this is a something that you can use with your own little variations. The idea is that you start by making your point, right? Then you give an example, and then when you give the example, after that you give, okay, here's what is really happening, right? You explain your point, you say that this is the reason for this, and finally, after elaborating a little bit more, you basically point something where you want to go next, and you say essentially this points to somewhere I want to go. Let's take a small example. Let's say we are saying we are describing something about democracy in this paragraph. So we say democracy is, more than just a form of government. Okay, so we are describing democracy, and we can say, for the example, we can say that, for instance, the Right to Information Act gives citizens the ability to request for information, and therefore talks about transparency and accountability. Okay, now you can say that a key reason for this is that in democracy, it is believed that every citizen should have rights to information, and it holds its leadership accountable, right? Something like this. And you can then talk, say, essentially this points to another idea that I want to elaborate, which is accountability in leadership. So, from democracy, we went to accountability in leadership. Okay. So, this is how you construct a paragraph. Then it is very easy to read because you are starting with your making your point. Then you are giving an example, you are illustrating, we are adding credibility to your example or to your idea. Then you are explaining the reason why it matters. I told you in an earlier video why it matters. And then you basically, this is the hook to the next. So this is one way. Remember, this is not the only way. Not the only way. So there are other ways paragraphs can be written, and sometimes it is dictated by the topic and the arguments. So what is this doing, this example? It is making sure that there is some flow in your writing and that it is purposeful. It gives a sense of direction to your writing and make sure that you are reaching your destination. And with the sentence structures, if you make sure that the sentences are short and describe one idea only, then you are home, because not only are you clear and concise, but you also have a flow and a structure to your writing. Now let's talk a little bit about narrative styles and how you adjust for them. In a previous session, we talked about 3 different narrative styles that we typically use within UPSC essays: descriptive, argumentative, and persuasive. In descriptive, as you remember, you are describing or exploring one topic in multiple directions. In this, what happens is you're often lost in terms of the flow because you have to go all over the place. Unlike argumentative and persuasive, where you pretty much know the direction of where you want to go. In this case, I think there's a little more room for using emotionally charged language or having some sensory, vivid sort of explanation. Here are some examples: silent suffering, fractured social fabric, invisible hands of change. So these describe something in a visceral way, in a sensory way, in a vivid way. So I think what normally I do is when I read an editorial or read a particular description and I like something about explanation or detailing of a certain aspect, I highlight it and I keep it later for my consumption. Make sure you do that. There is no one correct path to do this, but here are some pointers in terms of how you can use language. You must avoid cliches and melodrama and avoid being overly dramatic, but these kinds of small ideas communicate a lot about, okay, here the hands of change. What is unique about the hands of change, or what is unique about the social fabric or the suffering? So the qualifiers are emotional, but they do convey a lot more than just one word. So that's something that you should keep in mind. For argumentative, we must always be balanced and logical. We cannot afford to get into the emotional territory too much, and we must use neutral tone and data-based reasoning. Facts, examples, these are extremely important. And a lot of us have seen students struggle with communicating the reverse counterpoint. And some tools that you can use is things like critics, counterview, empirical evidence. So you're saying one thing and then you're saying, however, there is another school of thought or another counter view, or empirical evidence suggests something else, or some critiques of this idea suggest that it has these cons. So I think there are many ways in which you can make your sentence interesting. But in this case, we show both sides and we conclude logically that the truth is actually somewhere in the middle. It's not one way or the other. So, balanced and logical style of writing is extremely important. And we'll see some rhetorical devices that help us do that later. In persuasive, we are trying to inspire action. Remember, you talk like a leader and you think that we have to convert the people that I'm speaking with. You should be confident, assertive, and there has to be a dash of morality, dash of emotional appeal at the end of the day. Some ambition has to come in your speech. So these things like we must characterize that. It's no longer a choice but a necessity. See, this is how a leader speaks when he wants people to move in a certain direction. So use cause and effect. This has happened, therefore we must spring to action. We must move ahead, right? So these kinds of things, cause and effect, call to action, something moral, confident, aggressive, these are things that we must put in our narrative. So you see how the treatment of these three are different in terms of language. We use emotion to paint a picture in one. We use language to certainly touch both sides and measure and balance in one. Whereas in persuasive, we use language that is assertive, moving us in one direction and making a plea, a moral plea about what we must do, right? So think of these things as you write. Once you start categorizing your essays in the right way, I think the choice of language will emerge and it will help you put things together. Now let's talk a little bit about rhetorical devices. As I said, we are not going into the details of this, but rather understanding 4 or 5 key ones that will help us. These devices basically add depth and style to what we write. They improve the reader engagement. It makes your writing interesting, right? And they reflect clarity of thought and maturity. It basically tells the reader that, oh, this person writes fluently and has maturity over language. So these three things are extremely important, and whether or not you are a good student of language, I think you can master these rhetorical devices because you see them in action every day. When you hear news channels, when you hear leaders speak, people, you read editorials, you see this every day. So just by knowing what they are, you can start identifying them in your day to day where they occur, and you will have a renewed sense of language in yourself. So I'll give you some examples. Analogy and metaphor. This is a rhetorical device which is used much too often. Democracy is the slow cooker of change. Okay, you must have read something like this in an editorial page, and you remember that this is using an analogy to communicate an idea. Tried rule, very, very popular. Liberty, equality, fraternity. I came, I saw, I conquered. The sun, the moon, the stars. And there are so many examples. Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. So the rule of three always works. And if you can communicate an idea in 3 ways, and 3 is a magic number, right? The Holy Trinity. And so many concepts in the world are described in threes. And the magic number, definitely try and use it. If you can communicate an idea using 3 words, what would those words be? Okay, I have an argument which is talking about something. Can I reduce this argument into 3 words? and then talk about those three words. Maybe you're talking about democracy, so you're saying liberty, equality, and fraternity. Then the other one is use questions. Instead of writing a normal sentence, you can write a question. You can say a nation cannot progress if half its population is left behind. That's one way. Or you can say, can a nation progress if half of its population is left behind? So this is another way that a lot of leaders speak, and this is called a rhetorical question. What does a rhetorical question mean? That its answer is already there. You don't have to think the answer. Everybody will say no to this question, and then you have everybody's consent to move forward. So in a way, you're manufacturing consent of what you are saying and how the reader will read it. You are forcing the reader to nod when the reader is reading your writing. So these are some rhetorical devices. Let's see some of them more in detail. And as we see them, I'll show you some good and bad examples so you know what not to do. Okay? Now, analogy or metaphor, the purpose is that you have an abstract idea and you are trying to make it easy, right? So that's why you are using a metaphor to make it easy to understand. Democracy is like a tree. It takes years to grow, but only a moment of neglect to wither. This is a good example because it is visual and relatable and ties directly to essay's theme. Okay, so I think this is why it works. But if you could also say democracy is like a pizza with many toppings. And that will not work because it is frivolous, it is unrelated. Okay, now you are like, okay, what is the relationship with something edible? Is democracy something edible? So it is distracting from the seriousness of the topic. So this is some good and bad examples of analogy. Make sure that it is relatable and goes with the tone of the essay. It's not something that is frivolous or sounds comical and makes a mockery of something, makes you look less serious about the whole thing. Let's look at the rule of three and what it does for your writing. So it creates a rhythm and it reinforces key ideas, right? So this example says we need equity, empathy, efficiency. What do you think it works? The use of E in all three words is a splendid example, right? So it works because the words are coherent and complementary and they form a natural progression. You go from equity to empathy to efficiency. It's sort of building up this idea. So again, I think the more you read, more you underline and store. Have your flashcards and keep highlighting newspapers, and you can get a whole lot of this triad examples. They're used all over the place, right? Now here's a bad example. We need jobs, fashion, education. Okay, they're just three words, but they don't come together. There is no logical connection. So therefore, it's a random grouping, right? So it is not communicating anything, unlike the previous one that was coherent, complementary, and it was building on top of one another, right? That was a natural progression. So this is not going to do anything special in terms of the treatment or the understanding of your sentence. The reader will not take away anything more than what you are saying in those three words. But here, the reader is going to take away a lot more from your writing. Questions. Questions engage us in a reflection. So we are almost, okay, somebody is asking us a question, we need to think about it, right? So rhetorical question is not expecting an answer because it already knows what the answer is. So it is basically prompting the reader to follow along or nod the head and get some sort of consent manufactured. In this example, the user is saying, yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and then automatically follows to the next idea that you are talking about. A bad example is this one. Isn't it obvious that everything is messed up? Well, this is a question. It also is a rhetorical question that you are expecting the answer that yes, everything is messed up, but it is vague, it's colloquial, and it's not really saying anything other than everything is messed up, right? So it is not adding in value beyond what it's saying. So also it is the colloquial nature is something that compromises with the sincerity, dignity in tone. So it's not taking you anywhere. Another interesting device is parallelism. Parallelism roughly does the same thing as the triads do by putting emphasis, underlining the idea that you want to communicate. So they see the sentence. We must invest in education. We must believe in innovation, and we must act with urgency. This repetition of the structure with the rhythm, it's almost like lines in a poetry, right? So it is repetitive and there is a rhythm to it, and this is strongly emphasizing what I'm trying to say. Compare this with something like we must invest in education, comma, innovation, and we must be urgent about it, right? That sentence will not communicate as much as this kind of sentence. And here you see that there is no repetition. We need education, investing in innovation is good, and urgency is required. It's the same thing, but said it without a pattern, which makes it very forgettable, right? And the phrasing is also a little awkward and jerky. But I think here the key thing is there is something that repeats, that repetition and the rhythm is very important. And these are easy to identify when you see it and know when you don't see it. So I'll not go into the detail, but what you should do is whenever you read fiction, non-fiction, whatever you read, underline when you find a rhetorical device and remember to make a mental note. Contrast or antithesis is another one where we say two things, two sides to a particular point of view, and we express both of them in one sentence to make a point. So India's strength lies not in its uniformity, but in its unity despite diversity. So on one side there is uniformity, the other side there is diversity, right? So it is taking these two concepts and putting it in one sentence, because in one go you are telling the reader that not only I know about this, I also know about the lack of this, right? So you're communicating two ideas at the same time, and that's very powerful than communicating just one idea. So this is contrast or antithesis. India is sometimes united, sometimes divided. It is true, it is not untrue, right? But it is vague and doesn't offer any insight. So the insight the first statement offered, that the uniformity is not important, the diversity is important for our strength, from a strength perspective. That is very different from saying that sometimes we are strong and sometimes we are weak. Actually, that doesn't mean anything. Everything is sometimes this and sometimes that. So no insight and no elegance. A word of caution as you use rhetorical devices: you might be tempted to use them a lot, but they definitely do not overdo them, right? It can get pretty annoying if you overdo these rhetorical devices. So, for example, a rhetorical question: how many questions do you think you should have in your entire essay? Maybe twice. If you use it 3 or 4 times, it stands out, and then it will lose its efficacy. So you should use it sparingly and purposefully. Overuse makes it look artificial or rehearsed, right? You're just trying to reuse that. So you need to balance style with substance. We talked about style with these rhetorical devices, and you must balance it with good content. So presentation must be balanced with good content. Stuff and fluff both have to go together, so don't overdo any of the two. So I'll summarize by saying that good language is clear, purposeful, persuasive. We talked about clarity, we talked about control, we talked about flow. Sentence variety, rhetorical devices, narrative tones. Look at them, practice them, learn to spot them when you read something, which is extremely important. And vocabulary must suit the idea and the audience, and the audience is the UPSC examiner. So don't worry too much about, oh, I don't know good language and all of that. As long as you use the right keywords required for the content and you use them in a compelling way using these rhetorical devices and language styles, I think we'll be home. You must practice the intros for the three narrative styles. Every PYQ that you see, try to identify which narrative style that they belong to and try to write intros. And when you read editorials, like I've said multiple times, try to identify the rhetorical device. And I would say that you write so many essays. Write one essay with focus on language articulation. At least one or two you should write. Okay, I am going to use good language practices, rhetorical devices, and other things I learned in the course. And you see the difference that it creates in your writing.